Hari Bol, Pranam to you all. Welcome to explore the land of faith together. Today we will talk about Saranagati, surrender, and concentrating on the question, how does faith look like? I will begin by reciting a few prayers as a blessing for our meeting today, and you are welcomed to join them. Om Jnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Vansakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya evatsa Patitanam Panavebhyo Vaisnavebhyo Namo Namaha Vande Sri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gododaye Puspavanto Citro Sando Tamonudo Vandeham Sri Ramakrishna Apayat Saranastako Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Supalapriyo. When we started exploring the land of faith together a couple of weeks ago, I introduced a few questions to guide our journey. What is faith? Where does it come from? How does it grow? What does faith look like? So today we have arrived to the question, what does faith look like? So we will talk about Saranagati, surrender, as the outer expression of faith. The 6 characteristics of Saranagati, or the 6 characteristics of surrender, have originally been described in Vaishnava Tantra, accepting what is favorable to bhakti, rejecting what is not favorable, having faith in God's protection, accepting God as one's only maintainer, giving oneself completely to God, and humility, feeling humble. Saranagati has been referred to by many of the great theologians of Gaudiya tradition, and Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the great theologian of our tradition who lived in the 19th century, he was the one who really took the gem of Saranagati and kind of polished it and introduced it to the Gaudiya community. He wrote a whole book of songs and prayers about Saranagati, surrender, and addressed it from the Gaudiya point of view in relation to devotion to Krishna Chaitanya. So for us, Saranagati is not practice in itself, but it's a limb of bhakti. We do Saranagati in relation to Raja Krishna Chaitanya, and in relation to growth of devotion. So today I'm going to speak about the first 4 characteristics of Saranagati: accepting what is favorable, rejecting what is not favorable, having faith in God's protection, and accepting God as one's only maintainer. And then next Monday, I will concentrate on 2 remaining characteristics: giving oneself completely to God and humility. So last week we talked about the growth of faith from Shraddha, tender faith, to Nishtha, firm faith, or a faith that is informed by revelation. And Saranagati reflects light on this process, or on this growth process from a bit different angle. It is said that the 6 characteristics of surrender are completed at the stage of Nishtha. So Saranagati, it's the outer expression of Shraddha, the very first stage. And then, yeah, it's also said that it's completed at the stage of Nishtha. So in the other words, these characteristics of Saranagati, they are with us from the very beginning of our journey. And then they grow stronger and more visible as we move forward and our faith grows. The growth of faith that happens inside of us, it expresses itself to the world through these characteristics of Saranagati, and also the other way around. Engaging ourselves in Saranagati will help our faith to grow. So today I'm going to say a little bit of something about each one of these characteristics, or the first 4 of these characteristics, in relation to our spiritual practice and the growth of faith. So let's start with accepting what is favorable to bhakti, accepting what is favorable to the growth of love and devotion in us. That sounds quite rational to me as a principle. Like, if we want to grow in faith, we need to surround ourselves with things that support us and help us to move forward on our path. So the question arises, what is favorable for me right now on this specific spot where I am standing? If we decide that we want to run a marathon, we will make a practice schedule. And if you are really, really serious about it, we might hire a personal trainer. Our friends will soon notice that we go quite often running despite of the weather. We go to gym quite often. We perhaps eat differently, and we talk so much about running all the time. So our goal of running the marathon is present in many ways in our life, in our everyday life, even when we are not actually running out there. So similarly, when our goal is to learn to love unconditionally, we engage ourselves in things that support reaching that goal. We can find a lot of suggestions and recommendations in the scriptures. Like we hear, for example, about the 9 limbs of bhakti: hearing, chanting, remembering, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, worshipping the deity, praying, serving, becoming a friend, and completely surrendering ourselves to God. And we hear about 64 limbs of bhakti, 64 principles that strengthen devotional service. And it is said that the most important out of these 64 items are offering water to the Tulasi tree, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, associating amongst the devotees, engaging in Sankirtana, and living in Mathura. So there are so many different things that are favorable to bhakti, and especially in the beginning, we can't do all of them. At least like at once, we can't engage in all of them at the same time. So we need to use our intelligence in order to discriminate what will support our growth most, but also what will inspire us right here, right now. What brings us joy in our journey? If there are those truly inspiring elements on place in our daily practice, or in our weekly practice, or in our spiritual practice in general, then we can perhaps add some of those things that we know that are good for us, but which don't come quite that naturally for us. some of those things that require a little bit of stepping out from our comfort zone. If we have a lot of inspiring things, then we can add something a bit more difficult and the whole package doesn't come too difficult as such. Our scriptures, they encourage us to know ourselves, to know where we are, and not to pretend to be more advanced than what we actually are. We are, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit coughing today, so I hope it doesn't get worse than that. So our scriptures are encouraging us not to pretend to be more advanced than what we actually are. And it's also like what is good and favorable for one person, it might be too much or too little for other person. So we need to know where we are and not to compare it too much with others. We are also advised not to push ourselves too hard or too little. I find it inspiring how often this kind of advice comes up in different forms like for example, it's a good thing to study books, but then we are also advised not to study too many books, and it's like in many places it's kind of the advice giving in both directions, not too much, not too little. So it's important to find the right balance between our practice and our other responsibilities. The idea is not what we can do sometimes in the future when we have more time and everything is so different and things are so much better than they are right now. The question is, what is helping us and inspiring us today in the middle of all other things that are going on in our lives? What is helping us to stay connected to our ideal here? What is helping us to grow in our faith and in our service? And the other point is to make time and space in our lives for those things that are inspiring our practice and growth. There's a story about a professor who wanted to give a lesson about time management to her students. So she brought a big glass jar on the table in front of the audience, and she filled the glass jar with big rocks and asked the students whether the jar was full. The students were a little bit confused, but they said that yes, the jar, it is full of those big rocks. The professor shook her head and she took a bag full of smaller rocks and put them on the jar. And those smaller rocks, they were able to go in between the bigger rocks. So she was able to put quite a lot of those smaller rocks into that jar. So she asked again students whether the jar was full. And now the students, they were convinced that yes, it really looks full now. Well, the professor, she took again other bag that was full of fine sand, and she poured the sand into the jar. And again, the sand was able to go in between the big and small rocks. And then she asked again, she asked the students that what was the lesson of this experiment with jar. So one of the students raised her hand and said, the lesson is that no matter how full our calendar is, we can always fit something more in between what we already have there. The professor said, well, actually no. The lesson is that we need to be sure that we put big and important things first in our schedule. Because if we fill our days with small rocks, with things that are not so important, we will not have space for the big rocks anymore, the most important things in our life. At that point, one of the students got up and walked in front of the classroom. And she had a big bottle of water with her, and she poured the water into the jar. And the water was still able to enter between the big rocks and small rocks and the fine sand that were in the jar already. And the student said, "It is like you said, Professor, we need to arrange our life in a way that there's room for big, important things, and also for those smaller things that also have meaning and place in our life. And after we have done that, and we feel like our life is full and complete, there's still room at that point for the compassion of Vaishnavas. There's always room for the flow of divine love. We can let it flow through our everyday life and let it touch everything that we have there, everything that is going on in our lives. And that will give us a feeling of purpose, and it will bind together the different aspects of our life so that we can learn to see our ordinary life through the lenses of our ideal. So hopefully some of those big rocks in our personal glass jars are elements of spiritual practice. And then in addition to that, we can learn to see things, we can learn to see all things in our life in connection to our ideal. And even if we're practicing alone, we feel like some of us might feel that there are devotees, there are not other devotees living close by, and we are kind of alone with our practice, not always getting support from people who physically live close to us. But even if that's the case, we are not really alone, because Krishna Chaitanya, he's with us in the form of his name. And there's always someone somewhere repeating the same mantra, singing the same song, saying the same kind of prayer. So we can join them in our minds and chant and sing together with our spiritual family. It's like this big, beautiful wave going around the globe all the time, and we can join that wave whenever and wherever we are. The second characteristic of Saranagati is rejecting the things that are unfavorable to devotion, the things that are somehow on the way of our spiritual growth. And I think that part of this comes quite naturally if we keep our focus on the positive side, like embracing the things that are favorable to bhakti and the growth of love. If we use at least some of our time in those things, we will have less time for other things that are perhaps not so favorable and are not helping so much us on our spiritual journey. And again, here we need to consult our intelligence to figure out what kind of things are in the way of our progress. Is it one of the 6 enemies of the mind: desire, anger, greed, arrogance, delusion, or jealousy? All of those are not particularly supporting our devotion, but is there one of them that is particularly tying us? Or are we suffering from low self-esteem that will make us think about ourselves also in the situations into situations where we could be thinking of divine or Vaishnavas? Do we have a habit of endeavoring? Well, I'm sorry, I can't say the word, doing too much and filling our days with all kinds of things, which at the end might burn us out. Even doing good things that as such are favorable to bhakti might result in deep exhaustion if we don't take care of ourselves and those who are nearer us. And it is not easy to learn off from this kind of thought patterns. It takes some time and commitment. My Guru Maharaj Bhaktivedanta Tripurari Swami, he talks often about the horizontal and vertical growth. So he's making the distinction between spiritual and personal growth. So if the horizontal growth, growing as human being, helps us to appreciate our spiritual ideal and helps us to walk the path forward, then it's probably a good idea to actively focus on some of those things that are not directly spiritual, but are helping us to move forward towards our ideal. And at the end, like we talked about in our last talk, as we engage in sadhana, spiritual practice, under a good guidance, the obstacles will disappear little by little. When we invite Krishna Chaitanya in our heart as we are meditating and chanting God's names, the weeds in our little garden are being pulled out so that the creeper of love can strengthen and have room to grow. So, Krishna Chaitanya is dancing on the courtyard of our heart and cleaning everything that keeps us away, all obstacles and difficulties on the path of love. So we can trust that. I mentioned before that there are so many lists in scriptures describing things that are favorable to bhakti. And in the same way, there are also many kinds of lists about things that are not favorable. When I'm reading some of those lists, I often get the feeling that they are quite hard and fast and kind of ambitious from my perspective. Like, for example, there are suggestions like giving up all material wealth or totally avoiding the company of non-devotees or not talking to women. And reading this kind of things, I'm often quite confused, like, what? But then again, when I'm reading these things, I'm thinking about that considering the time and place when those suggestions were written or spoken, it's likely that many of them were directed to either aspiring monastics or for people who already were living as monastics. And also some of them, they were written quite a long time ago in a different cultural setting. So it's I find it interesting to think about, like, okay, these were the recommendations back then, but what does it mean for me here? If I want to focus on my spiritual practice and really grow as a person, how can I apply that kind of things and recommendations in my life? What do they speak to me right here, right now, at this moment where I am? And that's why we need our guides and teachers and friends to help us to figure out how to apply and instructions and ideals in our life in a progressive way, in a way that makes our heart turn more towards our ideal and doesn't push us away or make us desperate because we are not able to do something that we are reading as in these long lists that we can find. But then, of course, at the same time, there are also a lot of advices in the scriptures that are still very understandable and fresh, even though they were written a long time ago. For example, there's a lot of emphasis on how we are talking. For example, don't engage yourself in talking nonsense or saying bad things about others. We are advised to abandon the practice of finding fault in others. And from the positive side, we are encouraged to be like bees that are searching for the nectar in flowers, for the nourishment of ourselves and for the nourishment of our community. There's an old story about a wise leader who was telling a bedtime story to her grandchildren. The origin of the story is unknown, but it's often connected with the Native Americans. So the story goes, there are two wolves living in me and in all the people. And those wolves, they are fighting constantly. One of the wolves is representing evil things in us, like anger, envy, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, lies, false pride, and feeling of superiority. The other wolf is all about joy, peace, love, hope, tolerance, humility, kindness, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The grandchild thought about this for a while and asked, who is winning the fight? And grandmother answered, the one that you are feeding. So with this story, I summarize these two characteristics of Saranagati by saying, whatever we concentrate on will grow. The third characteristic of Saranagati is having faith in God's protection. It is a mindset that allows us to wake up in the morning and enter each day with trust. Whatever will come along today, I'm not alone. God is there, Krishna is there protecting me. Like he protected the residents of Raj by lifting the Govardhan mountain to shelter them from Indra's anger. Lord Krishna will protect me because he is the friend of the devotees. He's the only shelter for the shelterless. There are beautiful verses in our scriptures that we can read and be nourished by. For example, Srimati Draupadi is describing God's protection like this. Like the sun ascending through the darkness, like a boat for the helplessly drowning, like a rain cloud of sweet waters for the parched, dry lands, like a treasure for the impoverished or poor, like a physician for the deadly afflicted. The Lord Sri Krishna is now coming to bless us with all good fortune. And there's another verse by Sri Prabodhananda Saraswati, whom Sri Chaitanya met in South India. And the verse goes like this. Alas, alas, how will the charming, wish-fulfilling creeper of pure devotion ever sprout from the desperately barren plains of my consciousness Despite my predicament, just one great hope awakens in my heart. By chanting the name of Sri Chaitanya Dev, nothing can remain to be lamented for by anyone at any time. I'm reading these quotes from the book Prapanna Jivanamritam, Positive and Progressive Immortality by Srila Sridhar Maharaj. That book has been the main inspiration for my talk today. So we talked a little bit about trust in our last talk. Like faith in God could also be seen as trust in God. And we talked briefly about how our life experiences affect our ability to trust. For example, if we are abandoned by people who are close to us, or if we have been let down by people who have been important to us, the trust that we had in them breaks down. And at the same time, our capacity to trust again can be cracked. And when we come into a situation that requires trust, we might notice that it's difficult for us to do that. And so I think that if experiences from the past have shattered our trust in such a profound way that it is still harming us remarkably, it might be a good idea to look for some help in a very material sense. Like, for example, if we are not able to enter into meaningful, harmonious relationships with other people due to the lack of trust, due to something that has happened in our past, it might be a good idea to talk with a psychologist about it. Just like we visit the doctor, if we broke our arm, it is reasonable to take care of our mind if it has been broken. And I want to say this aloud, what I just said, because I will also talk about how God can strengthen and cure our trust. And I do believe that when we are able to understand the depths of divine compassion, it will heal something in us. But at the same time, I don't want to give the false impression that I wouldn't appreciate the modern medicine and psychology that can be a great help for us, and in some situations even necessary, so that we can find a balance of mind and leave something behind that is not favorable in the growth of devotion. In our first talk, we talked about how faith and trust seem to come so easily for some people. And we talked about how they have already walked the way before until the certain point, so they are able to move fast forward. They have already experienced something about trusting in God. And after you have some trust already, it is easier to build on that. And trust can also be practiced. It is said that Saranagati is completed at the stage of Nishtha, the firm faith. So little by little, as we grow in faith, our Saranagati grows. Little by little, we learn to trust more in the compassion of Krishna Chaitanya and in the compassion of our teachers. And we can pray and bring our worries to the feet of our Lord, Gaura Nityananda. We can acknowledge where we are. I'm still not fully able to trust you. I have all these worries in my life. Please help me to learn to trust that you are there with me in the middle of all these things that are happening in my life. There's a story. Today seems to be a day that I'm telling many stories. But anyway, there's a story about a man who was hit by a big flood. The water in the river came up rapidly, and the man escaped on the roof of his house. And he was a pious, God-believing man, so he said a little prayer. He thanked God for being safe on the roof and asked God to protect and save him from the flood. And after a while, a small rowing boat came at sight, and an old man who was rowing yelled, "Hey there, would you like to have a lift? I have a place in my boat." The man on the roof shouted back, "Hey, thanks for asking, but no worries, I have help already coming." Soon after that, a bigger motorboat approached, and a middle-aged woman shouted at the man and offered him a boat ride to the shore. And the man on the roof again shouted back, "Hey, thanks for asking, but no worries, I have help already coming." And after some while, a helicopter approached, and the pilot shouted down to the man, "Hey, do you need help? We can rescue in a minute." The man on the roof waved back at the pilot and shouted, "Hey, thanks for asking, but no worries, I have help already coming." So time passed. It was slowly getting dark and a bit cold. The man on the roof, he was shivering, and he prayed again, "Dear God, thank you for protecting me and saving me from the flood. I know you are always there with me, even though you sometimes are testing me and trying my patience. I know that you also have so many other people to look after, but please, it's getting dark and cold. I'm tired. If somehow possible, please hurry in saving me." And then God replied to him and said, "Look, I have tried to save you 3 times. I sent the rowing boat, I sent the motorboat, I sent the helicopter. My dear friend, what are you expecting from me?" So in the same way, we are also sometimes blind to God's protection and to the many ways that God is there for us in every single day. And often the compassion of God comes to us through Vaishnavas, through devotees, through people in general. Even trees are offering us protection from sun and rain. There are so much compassion everywhere. And we are also called to join that, to help and protect others, to be kind to others. We are not meant to oppress those who are already oppressed in this world. We are called to value Sadhu Sangha, the association of devotees, to encourage the growth of faith and the growth of love in everyone. Accepting God as our only maintainer is the 4th characteristic of Saranagati. This deep trust in divine is often mentioned to be the most important aspect of Saranagati. It's like a foundation or ground floor for the house of devotion. Kind of like the other aspects of Saranagati rest on the deep trust and gratitude for the Lord. When we are trusting another person, we tend to see them in a good light. If they say something weird, we are surprised, but then we usually think that there must be some kind of a misunderstanding or a reason behind why they are saying something that doesn't make sense. So similarly, when we learn to trust in God and trust in the revelation, the statements that might seem at first a bit weird to us don't anymore shatter our faith. We are able to accept that some things might not make so much sense to us, but there's some kind of story to that and some kind of purpose behind everything. Accepting God as our only maintainer, it requires some humility, which is the other aspect of Saranagati. We often want to be strong and make it on our own. We might not feel good about if we need to ask for help and receive help from others. And it's not necessarily easy to realize and accept that in relation to God, we have nothing really. No matter how big we are in this world, no matter how much material wealth we gain, none of that will help us at the time of our death. Our material wealth will not nurture the growth of love in us. When we learn to admit and accept that at the end everything comes from God, air that we breathe, water that we drink, food that we eat, they all are products of an amazing ecosystem that we human beings most of the time take for granted. When we learn little by little to trust God and the spiritual practice we are engaging in, we can be sure that whatever happens to us, at the end, we are safe. We are taken care of each and every day of our lives. And none of the steps we have taken on this path have not gone in vain, nor they will go in vain in the future. Krishna is showing Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita how he's maintaining the whole universe. But for us as sadhakas, even more interesting and humbling is to think about how God is maintaining our spiritual nourishment, how God is sending us the seed of faith, the seed of love, and guardians to meet us along the way and watch over the growth of the tiny creeper of love and devotion that is growing in us, and how they are with us there in every step of our journey. That kind of deep trust doesn't come easily. It takes time to build. So we can pray that we learn to trust little by little. Please consider me to be a particle of dust at your lotus feet. My dear Lord, kindly accept me as your own. Or like Sri Yamunacharya is praying, O Supreme Refuge, I am not religious. I do not know the nature of the soul, nor have I any devotion for your holy lotus feet. Therefore, I am lost. I am lacking of all good, and I don't have any other shelter. Such as I am, I surrender unto the dust of your lotus feet. I find the last part especially beautiful. Such as I am, I surrender unto the dust of your lotus feet. We can be just like we are and trust that we are accepted. We can only give our sincerity, our humility, and our love, or at least our will to learn those things. So today we have talked about the first 4 characteristics of Saranagati. Accepting what is favorable, rejecting what is not favorable for the growth of bhakti, having faith in God's protection, and accepting God as our only maintainer. When we look at these characteristics of Saranagati, we can see how compassionate the process of Saranagati is. It basically meets us anywhere where we are. You don't really need to have faith in personal God in order to engage in Saranagati. If we think about, for example, these kind of life coaching aphorisms, that are extremely popular in these days. It's basically all about Saranagati. Do things that are good for your well-being. Avoid things that are not good for you. Avoid things that harm you and undermine your balance. Like, for example, avoid negative people because they will make you negative as well. Have trust that life will carry you. It's kind of a similar message than what we have been talking about today. Or we can have faith in God's protection, and at the same time, our understanding of God can be like God is some kind of remote entity, kind of a distant figure that we approach mainly in the mood of awe and reverence. But in Gaudiya tradition, like we talked before, for us, Saranagati is not practice as itself, but it's always connected to our ideal. It's always connected to Bhakti and to growth of Bhakti. So in Gaudiya tradition, we practice Saranagati in relation to the love of our life, Raja Krishna, Krishna Chaitanya. Our goal and focus is what will bring me closer to them and them closer to me. What is pulling me in that direction, and what is pushing me away from them? How can I learn to trust in their protection and in their maintenance? Vaishnava Tantra advises us to practice Saranagati in thought, word, and deed. And I quote, "By her power of speech, the surrendered soul declares, I am yours. In her thoughts, she knows the same, and in person, she takes refuge in the Lord's holy abode. In this way, the surrendered soul passes her life, her heart filled with joy." So Saranagati connects the ray of faith that has touched our heart to its source, the sun of love that never sets in the land of faith, beyond all misunderstandings and doubts. And we are coming little by little, one step at a time. Our faith starts to grow, and so these are characteristics of Saranagati. And as our faith deepens and gets more informed, our Saranagati deepens as well. I will finish today by reading one of the prayers written by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Now I have understood, O Lord, that your feet are eternally full of sweet nectar that dispels all sorrow and fear. Surrendering myself and all that I possess unto those lotus feet, I have laid myself down submissively under their shelter. Your lotus feet, O Lord, will certainly shelter me. There are no other protectors in this world of birth and death. At last, I know myself to be your eternal servant. Now the burden of my maintenance is exclusively yours. In my life of independence from you, I have experienced nothing but misery. But now, upon accepting those feet of yours, all my miseries have been cast away. Desiring a place at your lotus feet, the goddess of fortune performed difficult austerities. Only after receiving your feet did Lord Shiva attain his Shivatva, or quality of auspiciousness. Upon obtaining your feet, Lord Brahma had his desires fulfilled. Your feet are always held by the great sage Narada Muni within his heart. I now hold on my head those very same lotus feet, which drive away all fear, while I dance in great ecstasy, singing their glories. Your lotus feet will surely deliver Bhaktivinod from the dangerous perils of this worldly journey. Okay, I think we can stop here for today. I would love to hear some of your thoughts and experiences about Saranagati. And if there are any comments or questions related to this talk, I'm happy to hear them. Let's see that everyone is able to unmute yourself, and please make sure that you are in the English channel before you ask the question or make a comment.
Haribol, Haripriya.
Haribol.
Dandavat. I just wanted to say, because I haven't been able to attend these lectures of yours before, but I had heard from Sargrahi that they were very nice. So I was looking forward to coming here very much. And I have to say, I'm completely blown away by your lecture today. I don't know when I last heard such a wonderful lecture before. So I'm very, very much impressed and super, super happy to have heard all of this nectar today. So thank you very much. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, there was a comment by Prikupad Prabhu, who is also my dear friend, and so he was saying thank you for this class and saying some encouraging remarks for me. And I have to say that I really appreciate that comment. And also, like, for example, Sakirati has been like making similar comments before at the end of the last talk, for example. And the reason why I appreciate these comments is that they make me realize that quite often when I'm listening to a talk or perhaps reading an article, I might be totally inspired by the talk or by the article, but I don't usually say it aloud. Like I'm not saying a person like, hey, what you said there, it really made me think about this differently, or somehow, you know, I have heard this before, but today somehow it really touched me. And so I'm really taking these comments as an encouragement and advice for me as well to like act more in that way in the future myself. So thank you for the comment. All right, looks like there are no more.
Haribol.
So you don't have to repeat the English speaking people, only if the Spanish translator is speaking or the Polish translator is speaking. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Yes, I was very inspired when you mentioned how when if people are practicing alone, that they can contemplate that many people are also practicing at the same time, and in that way one is never alone. And it reminded me of a poem by Khalil Gibran, where he's speaking about prayer. And I will just read those lines that I was reminded of here. It says, "When you pray, you rise to meet in the air those who are praying at that very hour, and whom save in prayer you may not meet. Therefore, let your visit to that temple invisible be invisible be for naught but ecstasy and sweet communion. For if you should enter the temple for no other purpose than asking, you shall not receive. And if you should enter into it to humble yourself, you shall not be lifted. Or even if you should enter into it to beg for the good of others, you shall not be heard. It is enough that you enter the temple invisible." Yeah. Just thought about that.
Hey, thank you so much. That's a beautiful poem. I don't think I have heard that before, even though I have read some of Kipram's poems. So I have to look that up and read it again. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, now I think it's time for us to stop for today. I don't see any more comments or questions. So thank you so much for your presence. Thank you for the comments that were there. And thank you for the Spanish translation, Kaliuka Pavana Prabhu. We will continue exploring the Land of Faith on next Monday, 25th of October, the same time. And then we will be discussing the last two characteristics of Saranagati, giving oneself completely to God and humility. And next Monday also happens to be the disappearance day of Srila Narottama Das Thakur. So I will say a few words about his life in relation to faith, surrender, and humility. So I hope to see you all there. I offer my gratitude and my hope to learn to trust at the feet of my spiritual teachers and at the feet of Vaishnavas, who are like wish-fulfilling trees, full of kindness and compassion for all living beings. Sri Gaudiya Vaishnava Guru Parampara ki jai, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki jai, Gaura Nityananda ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaura Premanande, Hari Bol.
Srimati Haripriya Dasi ki jai.